Good day. This is Red Hawk. I'm coming to you from the South Hill in Spokane, Washington. My cohorts are Mary Ann Rudis, who's coming to me from the other side of town in the Valley of Spokane, and Bob Hayes, our intercontinental cohort, coming to us all the way from Florida. And today, I used to be the religious educator in a Unitarian church, and this week I realized that's where a lot of the deep ends came from, because I would hold these classes that would, have 100 people in them. And so today I want to talk about the grand relationships. And I originally did this lecture, and I'm not going to do the whole thing, in a class, and we had like a 90-minute follow-up discussion that was killer. But it's basically about the close-up and the cosmic view of relationship and how it's changing in some amazing ways. So I think we'll just go ahead and kick this puppy off and see what my cohorts have to say. And of course, I would always like to hear what you have to say. redhawkthedeepend@gmail.com. That's redhawkthedeepend@gmail.com. So in the beginning was the relationship, and the relationship was one. Now the one became the many, and the many intermingled and became more complex, and in its complexification, the grand relationship built up and became matter, and matter connected and reconnected and wove itself into this nest so that it could further complexify and then become life. And life reached out and touched. It interconnected and evolved into a window which the grand relationship could look out into and through itself. And that place, that's you and me, brothers and sisters. It's the human being. Now, we human beings have access to a very special relationship. This is the direct perception of nature's unity. The direct perception of nature's unity. I like saying that, can you tell? And this, to me, is what the spiritual experience is about. It represents a perception of a unity that has been with us since the beginning of time. So what is this relationship then? What is it? If you look it up, a relationship is a state of being connected. And it seems to me that relationships seems to be those connections, linkages, alignments that allow life's concerns and regards to reach out, touch, bind, access, associate, communicate, commune, and meet with other elements within the great happening. Now, we may not always know what connects us, but we are many times brutally aware when we become disconnected. So what is it that allows us to be aligned, linked up in relationship? And I can go through the senses, the human eye, and what it's able to discern of the visible spectrum of light. I could go through the acoustic system and the way the ear works, and then the middle ear. Oh my gosh. Google any of these senses and see how they're set up and hardwired into the brain. Man, I am telling you, we are a connected being. Over and over, we see that these different senses, the sense of smell and taste, all of them are connectors. In my mind, however, I think the most important of all these senses is the sense of touch. There's this thing that allows us to actually connect literally. Now, after you put all these senses together, what you get is a place, a center where all the signals seem to come together in some magical space. Is this what we call the seat of consciousness? Maybe. I've said before on phenomenology that perception is participation. All these senses are letting the world in and allow us to participate. And this magical space where it comes together is at the soul, the psyche, the center. How do we talk about it? But what we can say is it's self-reflective. And each of us lives at a crossroads where a number of signals that are coming together and have to be managed simultaneously. And manage ourselves in relation to those around us. Think about all of this that's happening all at once. And it just seems natural. We're humming along, And it's the way all life. But what we've learned is nothing exists in isolation. Everything is couched in an ocean of relationships. John Donne said it beautifully as he wrote, "No man is an island." Well, that's it, my brothers and sisters. And there is no life outside relationships. Martin Buber said, all real life, all real living is meeting. And physicists as well as mystics say everything's interconnected to everything else. Dostoevsky wrote, each of us is responsible for everything to everyone else. Now that's some radical empathy. Whether we see ourselves as sacred souls or as mere rational beings generated by a random process, we cannot live without hooking up, without connecting and communicating. Now, some relationships seem to be more transformative than others. Some connections seem to help us grow. They help us unfold these deeper potentials and lift us up into new orders of perception. They help us open and expand our centers. In a growing relationship, it always fosters trust and openness. Sure, there's doubt, but there's also this trust and openness that seems to poke through it. I think over and over we need to find more stories that are about befriending uncertainty, making uncertainty an element of our life and not a fearful thing. And of course, what we're talking about here is we're back to the idea of health and wholeness, aren't we? Because there are those relationships which seem to make us contract. They cause us to withhold and close ourselves off from the world. Go to our episode on toxicity. Human beings have been trying to figure out the best way to embody our relationships, how we can hook up with each other so that we might allow all life to unfold its true nature, so that we might grow. Oh, dare I say in my Star Trek consciousness, that we might grow to the stars. But sometimes our own relationships displace our creativity and we consume ourselves. I think the atomic bomb is a great expression of that myself. A lot of the instruments of war. So how do we touch that we might become midwives to a new life, to health and justice, to a wholeness that lets everybody in? Now, I'm convinced that relationships are little mini cultures, if you will. All relationships reflect the culture, and the culture is a reflection of all of our relationships. And Mary Ann's talked about this, about the planet. You know, it's about all our ideas together. If we could change our ideas and our relationships, the whole thing would change. Because as we change our relationships with one another, so also will our cultural connections change. And my friends, they are changing. Look at the family. My gosh, the family has, I was brought up, the dad was the breadwinner, the mom kept the household, raised the kids pretty much. Man, that is not the tune that I raised my kids under. That's not the tune my kids are raising their kids under. Change is come upon us from every corner of our lives, and we have been forced over and over to overcome fear of those different from ourselves, those ways of life that are different from the way we were brought up. Marilyn Ferguson, who wrote, I think, the Aquarian Conspiracy, wrote, "The most significant force in changing relationships is the transformation of fear. The most intimate relationships pivot on fear. Fear of the unknown, fear of rejection, fear of loss." And what's that great Hebrew saying? There is no greater fear than to love that which death can touch. Relationships either expand or contract our centers. A transformative relationship cannot be a fortress. A growing relationship can only occur in an open system. Now, in my mind, relationships like this become celebrations and explorations, and they're never this like hiding places, if you will. But I want to say expansion is not easy, but there are these breakthroughs where we just seem to pop into a different territory, a different landscape. Nothing looks familiar, and we become confused. But I'm suggesting, like the electron moving from one orbit to another, we're popping in from one orbit to another. We're not necessarily passing the space in between, and so we are in different territory. But I want us to see that if we're not open, what happens is isolation, cutting ourselves off, and that won't work. But I want to say also that confusion, man, it's part of it. If you're not confused, at least, I can get confused a few times a day, but I'm starting to attribute some of that to growing old. But confusion's pretty cool. It allows us to face our fears and overcoming them. Now, Teilhard de Chardin said, nothing on this planet grows except by conversion. That means moving from one form to another. And if we get attached to one form of ourselves, well, that can actually impede the very relationships that the whole universe is trying to engender through us. So how do we open ourselves to expansive relationships that are always new? Those transformative connections that invite continuous change. Someone told me in this class where I presented this that, Red Hawk, you're talking about a lot of novelty. It's really hard for people to process that stuff. Yeah. A Taoist meditation says, seek no contract and ye shall find union. You see, a transformative relationship must define itself. You can't try to conform to any standard or norm. That's what makes it transformative. And when our connections allow us to begin to feel another's joys and sorrows, well, we're talking compassion. And when they allow us to begin to respond to another's joys and sorrows, as we do our very own, that's called love. And of course, we're now at empathy, that semi-permeability I've talked about so much. So, this breakthrough moment, sometimes they're small moments, sometimes they're big, but a breakthrough moment, as one physician said, and I can't remember where I read it, it's as if you've been withholding your empathy for the whole world, and suddenly you lose your virginity, and you feel as if you want to make love to the whole concept, whole cosmos. Francis Fenelon stated that when you come to be sensibly touched, the scales will fall from your eyes, and by the penetrating eyes of love, you will discern that which your other eyes will never see. As we overcome our habit of fear in our intimate family and social relationships, there's a new level of trust that blossoms. Now, I will say in this presentation, my own dreams are that the awareness of this connectedness of all humanity and life will sometimes pervade the very fabric of our cultural norms, assumptions, and expectations. Again, more stories about uncertainty as our friend, about a future that's open, and for us to be co-creators with the very aspect of nature. Matthew Frock said it beautifully. He said, she has spread out for our delight a banquet that was 13 plus billion years in the making, a banquet of rivers and lakes, of rain and sunshine, of rich earth and amazing flowers, of handsome trees and dancing fishes. A new relationship is emerging. This moment, every moment. A new relationship where trees can be confused with rivers, depending on where the eye is placed. We are learning to see differently. Think of the Earthrise from the moon. New orders of perception birth new relationships. And it changes our behavior. All our thoughts, all our touching becomes present within a new context of meaning, a context in which we must now, as I said, co-create with the very mysteries of life, co-create with that which we don't even really understand. My dream, as we reach out to each other, we will transform. We will transform this world. We begin to see that all things at all times are inextricably connected. So finally, my friends, in order that we might grow to the stars, we must always and continually meet where our souls end and the world has not yet begun. It's a reaching. And yet, as I go through the archaeology of my soul, this paper, it rung true in how real this thread of the deep end is for me, and how I am compelled to get to the questions that cannot be answered but need to be tugged on in order to find at least a fuller meaning of who we are and what life is really about. Now that was quite a long monologue, if you will. So, Bob, I'm going to turn it over to you first. What say you in response to this belch? Oh, wait a sec. Go ahead. I'm sorry. I had you up. Wrong one.
Pretty hard to encapsulate it into a few words. I think you've hit on a lot of very important concepts there. I mean, we've talked in the past, in past shows, about how human beings can't be human without relationships. I mean, it's been shown many, many times scientifically. Anthropologists, sociologists, psychologists have shown that we don't become humans without relationships with other people. That's how language is learned. That's how customs are learned. That's how we learn how to behave in certain situations and so forth. So the first point is that we can't exist without relationships. Second point is those relationships are constantly evolving. This is what you were getting at. They're all constantly changing. And we have to be open to the fact that we can't understand how another person is coming to a relationship except by reflecting on how we are perceiving that relationship. And hopefully we can open ourselves empathically enough to begin to get a sense of what this other person is bringing to the relationship. Even though we can't know what's going on inside of them, we can hopefully, through interactions with them and through opening ourselves, come close to estimating what's going on there. And the more we can do that, the closer the relationship becomes. But we can't make the mistake of thinking they're going to be static, that our relationship with anyone or anything is going to be the same, because everything is going to be changing. So we've got to be open to that change and open to let other people go through the changes they need to go through as we're going through the changes we need to go through. Finally, the most important relationship, I think, is the relationship that we have with ourselves. Now, you might call it a higher self or the observer or whatever, but we have the ability as sentient creatures to evaluate what we're doing with our lives, the behaviors that we engage in. We can step back from those and make a determination whether or not they're healthy, they're positive, they're aiding us in having healthy relationships or not. And I mean, it's been called the still small voice, all of the conscience, all of these things. If we can enhance that relationship and be open to honest evaluations of ourselves, then we have a much better chance of having healthy relationships with other people.
Amen. Mary Ann?
Well, there's a lot that's been laid out already. I'm not sure. One thing that really strikes me is, yes, we are constantly in a relationship of some kind. Even our relationship to nature, the act of breathing, we are in relationship with trees, and we're in relationship with our environment. So there's all of this stuff going on, and I agree that our relationship within ourselves is so paramount, and how we conduct ourselves, because that is going to create relationships with nature, with our environment, with our community, with each other. And if we're not living in a place where we can, how did you said something about the habit of fear. If we can't somehow release that habit of fear, because if we want to create something new, that something new is unknown. And we have to lose that fear of the unknown and be able to, and you also, Red Hawk, in your opening talked about trust and openness. We also have to be able to have a level of trust in the fact that even if it's unknown, we can give up the fear or go beyond the fear, in spite of the fear, and be able to tell our stories and connect with each other and connect with the world.
Yeah.
So yes, I think relationships, we're in relationship all the time, constantly, even in isolation. And, there are lots of studies out there and lots of things about how detrimental isolation is to us as human beings when we cut ourselves off. But even then, we're not completely cut off, but we may have stagnated ourselves. And so if we want to continue to grow and continue to learn and continue to create a better world or create a more just world, then our relationships are a pivotal part of that.
Yeah. And something, a point that we all made, but that I can burn in a little bit more, is that relationships are not fixed. And they are all moving all the time. Literally, processes within processes within processes. You go down to a cell or even, a single atom. Relationships are happening at the most minuscule level and at the most cosmic level. And as a human being, to realize I am in relationship with the whole universe. And in my opening, the universe took a long time to create a window to look out through itself, and that's you and me. And when we begin to take that in a way that allows us to participate more fully, I think that's what the universe is calling us to do. And that's why now, within the grand relationships, we are actually not being run by evolution, but we are co-creators of the evolving forces of the universe. And that gives us both power and should offer some fear in the awe type of category. But I think one of the things I want our listeners to see is that this relational piece of life is ubiquitous, and there is no escape. One of the reels I watch is of this on Facebook is about this guy, Dick Prudhoe. He lived in the woods by himself for 30 years, and he filmed so much of what he was doing and how he was doing it. And he was a mechanic who got in an accident and almost died, and said, I'm going to go live in the woods for a month, and he ended up staying 30 years. Was he in isolation? Not for him. I mean, he got to be friends, oh, there's that moose again. I'm going to miss the bears as they go into hibernation. And he would go on and on. He would fill his hand with some seed, and birds would come and eat out of his hand. So this isolation piece is something we each have to judge for ourselves, if you will. Even Jesus went to R&R quite a bit. Thought, holy moly, I got to get away from this place, get away by myself. And that brings your comments into the picture, Bob, and that's that our relationship within ourselves, those processes within processes, a lot of people don't want to know those. They just want to control it so that it serves them in a way that they think it should serve them. But then it becomes less transformative. And I believe that process of what's going on inside of us is supposed to be transformative. If you're the same person this year as you were last year, if you believe the same things this year as you did last year, my friends, I hate to say it, but you missed something. Because something's going on, and the process of all these relationships is nothing but transformative. It is, and I've said this before, the only game in town is growing. If you ain't growing, what the hell are you doing? And I think that this piece that we're talking about is so integral to watering our own garden. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah. Once we realize that we are more than just our animal impulses, but more than just how we react to things, that we have the ability to be proactive in our lives. Once we've made that realization, and a lot of people don't, a lot of people they're on autopilot for their whole life, and they're perfectly happy to be that way. But in my opinion, once you realize that you are more than that you can be more than that, then that gives you a responsibility to do something with it. To Marianne, you say quite often to take control. The word is escaping me that you're one of your favorite words. To make decisions that are thought out from a higher viewpoint. And if you fail on that responsibility and regress back into autopilot, then you're really not living up to your potential, and you're not making it possible to evolve to higher states.
Amen.
Yeah, I think there's a point where you start to make choices that are not based on action and reaction, but where you can kind of step above that and see things differently. And you're right, responsibility came to my mind when you guys were talking too. It's a huge responsibility, because what we're doing is affecting everything that's happening. And the idea that we can close ourselves off, and that, to me, that's what isolation is when we close ourselves off. It doesn't matter. You could be in a crowd. You could be out there every day, or you could be alone. But when we isolate ourselves, that's when we stop sharing. We stop connecting consciously. But we are always in some kind of relationship. So.
Amen. And my opening was a lot longer than usual, so we're kind of bumping up against our time zone here. Bob, final comments?
Well, I'll just emphasize again, we have the ability to take on responsibility in our lives, that we can take on control, not that we can control relationships, but we can control our reaction in relationships, or at least attempt to. And if that control can involve becoming more empathic, becoming more caring, becoming more open, then the chances of those relationships being healthy is greatly increased.
Amen. Marianne, final comments?
Yeah, that just made me think of, there's a space between when something happens and when we react to it. I think Viktor Frankl wrote about this, and it's in that space is when we can make a different choice. And in order to do that, we have to be aware of what's going on in our own mind. We have to know what it is that is happening, give ourselves that split second of space to be able to make a choice on what we want to do next. So, and that's going to shape all of our relationships.
Amen. And that's a great segue of kind of where we're going to go next. Because how do we step outside our presets and defaults in relationships. We actually grow those. And we're actually, what Marianne and Bob and I are all talking about, well, we're talking about growing new orders of growing. New ways of seeing, new ways of putting the world together. And those new ways, they ain't yesterday. They're not going to be as comfortable. We're going to have to accommodate and assimilate them in new ways. Where do we get these defaults? Where do we get these presets? Well, I'm going somewhere that I've kind of avoided from just about all the deep ends, and that's the family of origin. And I think I want to go there to confess, and also to bitch, and also to say, man, it took a lot of energy to get past my defaults and presets into a new way of seeing the world, and that way is not the way I was taught. I'll tell you, family of origin, being honest with that stuff, seeing where my own fuddy-duddiness, my own laziness, my own compulsion to indict, all of those things come from, and then to own them, holy moly, son of cannoli. Family of origin, it's not comfortable. I spent years in therapy dealing with this stuff, and we're going to go back because I can't not touch it without getting caught. My friends, beware, be alive, and most be blessed, for you are.